And we're live. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Natasha.
Hello. I'm Karen.
And I'm Sarah.
Please, everyone, forgive. Karen actually isn't here this week. We got a 13-year-old boy to take her spot and read the script.
Savage.
She's got some voice issues from being sick.
Way to kick a person when they're down.
Oh, God, I'm sorry, but this is so funny. Oh, wow. So we had met on Monday, me and Karen, to talk about what we were going to do this week when everything was shut down, and decided that it would be best if we return to basics this week instead of just, skipping a call, and talk about why we're doing this, because there are people I know that are kind of joining us now for the first time. And we're also going to be working more on getting our 5 calls page going, which has pretty much nothing on it to speak of at the moment. So we're, going to start from base again and give everybody who's interested in getting involved but does not know where to start a bit of a primer today.
Yes. Ironically, we decided to talk about how the government works because the government was broken.
Lol.
One was there to take our call, yeah.
So those of you, again, who have not already, you should sign up for the newsletter, because I sent out some resources on from Build Track 50, So You Want to Get Involved. Is that the title of it? I think.
So you want to take action.
So you want to take action, right. Which has a really helpful flow chart. It's helpful in that if you're a visual learner, but it's also at first glance in itself overwhelming because it goes in so many directions. And also I put in a link for the legislative session schedules for every state, so that if you don't know whether you are in session or not, you can find out. And I know I am not, because Texas is weird.
It is. Colorado is in session. Hooray.
Yay. All right. So who wants to get started on this train, on this legislative train?
All right. So I'm going to start at the top, and Sarah's welcome to interrupt me at any point to talk about how crazy the different states are, because that's been her education over the last year.
Oh,
but you all know the basics, I'm sure, which is that a bill gets introduced. The idea comes from wherever, but a legislator writes it, possibly with help, and then introduces it in whichever chamber. So it could get introduced in the House, and it could get introduced in the Senate. And for our Congress, it's a bigger version of how all of the states work, which is supposed to be the same process. So in the states, sometimes it's the House, or sometimes they call it the Assembly, and then the Senate, except for Nebraska, where they only have a Senate. But I digress.
Oh, brother, here we go already.
Here we go. Anyway, so a bill gets introduced either in the House or in the Senate. And then it'll get read so that everybody knows what it's about. It gets filed, and then it will get assigned to a committee. And there, in most states, it will die. In the Mountain West, bills often have about a 50% chance of passing, depending what the state is. Back east, they have more like a 5 to 10% chance of passing, depending on what the state is. So if it gets,
I didn't know the percentages were that low. Man, that's really surprising.
Well, New York introduces whatever 10,000, 15,000 bills a session, so they can't all pass.
Yeah, just didn't really.
Whereas
think about
Wyoming
it in
will
terms.
introduce, like Colorado will introduce 500, 700 bills. So it's a whole different thing. So yeah. It's good to kind of know a little bit about your political culture, but it's not that important. You can still call and make your voice heard. All right, so bill gets introduced, put to committee. The committee is supposed to be people with an interest in that topic. So it might go to health and safety, it might go to the judiciary, it might go to Ways and Means, it might go to whatever. So whatever the topic is, some people are supposed to consider it. And why that matters to us is that's when the public can go and give testimony. So that's when you can actually show up and tell them what you think. That's also a great period of time to call and tell the senators what you think, or the representatives, depending on the chamber, what you think. All right, so then it'll get either approved and voted out of committee. Maybe it'll never even get voted on and it'll just die in committee. And if the committee likes it, they'll pass it out of committee and then it goes to the floor for a vote. So then if that chamber likes it, it crosses over to the other chamber. So the difference between the chambers, the House or the Assembly is going to be a larger chamber with more people, but shorter terms. And so that's supposed to be the people's representatives, especially for Congress. So they're supposed to be closer to the people because they have fewer people to represent and they're supposed to have like more focused interests. Then the Senate is the smaller body, fewer of them. For Congress, that's just 2 per state, so it's not very many, whereas it's 400 some, in the House. Mm-hmm. And then they have longer terms. So they're supposed to be more deliberative, less given to the passions of the day because they don't have to face voters except less often. So those 2 together are supposed to give us, important bills, but also get well considered. In theory, it's a great setup. Yeah, I've learned a lot about the House of Lords lately. That's a different setup. That has its merit as well, surprisingly enough.
Is the House of Lords the one where fistfights break out fairly frequently?
No, that's the House of Commons.
Oh, that just delights me so much.
The House of Lords is like 700 people and they're appointed for life. And
oh, wow.
Tremendous. But they're titans of industry or scientists or people who have made their mark in some hugely positive way, and they are unbelievably smart and contribute just on their topic. Anyway, but I digress. All right, so the bill makes it to the other chamber, goes to committee again. So that gives us a second chance to call, a second chance to go testify. Then if they change it at all, it's got to get reconciled, so it's got to get reapproved by the first house or whatever. And then it gets passed, and it goes to the governor or the president to sign. Mm-hmm. The governor, of course, is the president of the state. So that's the executive branch for each state, whereas the president is the president of the country. That's the executive branch for the country. So then that gives you one last chance to call the governor or call the president and tell him to veto it. But even if it does get vetoed, it can go back and get overridden, which just happened in Maryland. They started out the session by overriding a veto for House Bill number 1 from last year.
What was that bill on?
You'd think I'd know since I brought it up. But that also happened with the budget. So famously last year, the Kansas governor vetoed the budget, and because he was like, I'm not raising taxes, and the House managed to override that and say, we are raising.
Great. I didn't hear about that.
And that was a pretty big deal. So it happens every once in a while that, even if it gets vetoed, it can get overridden. So there's like all these chants. That's very unusual. So when it's in committee in the House or when it's in committee in the Senate, that's the right time to call. But you need to figure out, is it in the House or is it in the Senate? Because it helps to call either your representative or your senator. And if it's already out of the one chamber, there's really no point in calling that first person because it's probably not going to come back to them. So that is the legislative process in a nutshell. I could have fit it in a smaller nutshell.
Well, I mean, it is. I like when you said like the governor is the president of the state, because I feel like that's a really like tidy way to explain to somebody who just really doesn't have experience with dealing with state level stuff, is to just give it an equivalent on the federal level. And, because that's what most people are more familiar with. And even though they're called the same thing, it can be hard to like keep it straight in your head,
And to a very large degree, to a larger degree than you think, the United States is 50 different countries, 50 different independent governments doing their own dang thing. Mm-hmm. I think Sarah will back me up on that.
Oh, yes. They really are.
Yeah, I used to be somebody who, like, when people were like, well, states' rights, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I can see that. And now, like, I'm just somebody who really enjoys being, like, predictability and consistency. And so the way things are set up now, I'm like, why did we do this to ourselves? Why, guys? Why'd you do it? But, there are pluses
the states are
everything.
The states are the laboratories of democracy. So in theory, they try all different things. So some states are like, let's have legal marijuana. And then the other states are like, let's wait and see how that goes. Right? And so fine, like that's legitimate, is to try out different things. Some states like come up with something new for healthcare. Massachusetts is like, hey, let's try this Obamacare thing. And then they're like, okay, and then maybe that'll bubble up. Maybe it'll be a good idea. Let's legalize gay marriage, and enough states do it. Or let's ban the death penalty. See how that goes. So they try stuff out, and it's a great way to actually test out laws before we make them effective for the whole country. I see the point. I also obviously think that the Bill of Rights is important, and that there should be a basic standard set of rights we all have, regardless of what state we live in. But yeah, no, the states have wildly different systems, wildly different laws. It's quite astonishing. So whenever we're talking about issues, it makes sense to look at what your state is doing as well, because your state representatives represent many fewer people and don't get as many calls, and kind of do want to hear from you. So let me show you. I've got a little thing ready to go here. Share my screen.
Yeah, those of you who are going to be listening to this on iTunes may want to find the YouTube video so that you can check out what it is Karen's going to be showing us, because she's doing a screen share.
It's just a map of the United States showing what states are currently in session. So we had a link to this map in the newsletter, so you can look up when your state starts. So if you click on the state, Colorado started January 10th, adjourns May 10th. So that's all the longer the session lasts in Colorado. If I go back to, say, New York, or maybe California is a good example, they go through August, so that's a longer session. Illinois goes all year long. So depending on the state, they're in for just a little while. Like New Mexico is out February 15th. They start January 16th, they're out February 15th. So they have a short session this year. And then Texas, no session this year. So yeah, each state is quite different in the length of their session. And so how much of an opportunity you'll have to call. So this website, it's just NCSL, National Council of State Legislatures, .org. So you can Google that up and then go to research about the state legislatures. And then that's where the link is. It's got the 2018 session calendar. So if you don't have the link handy, you can just Google it up. But that'll show you if your state is in session so that you know if you can call. So that should be helpful to you. And most of the states are in session right now. The ones that are not mostly start in the first week of February. So pretty soon, everybody will be in session. So I wanted to share that.
Cool. So Sarah, what are some weird things that you found that are different between states? I'm curious about that. You have a this is ridiculous look on your face, so I'm excited to hear about it.
I mean, not enough that I can like roll it off, but it's just interesting whenever you look into different states, how they are different, and like that, like for example, with Texas, like, you think like, oh, they only work every other year. Like, what are they going to do for this whole entire year? Like, what are they up to? What are they doing? And then like, there's people like in California where they work really late into the year. And then there's other states that can like open special sessions for like other things to follow. And it's just something I've really noticed that's been really interesting over the last year is how the special sessions really affect what type of legislation goes through. And, going back to the low percentage of legislation that actually goes anywhere, thinking more for your activism purposes, like Karen was saying, it's always important to let your voice be heard. But when there's 10,000 bills that you're trying to get your voice through in New York compared to 700 in Colorado, I think that those kinds of things let us know a lot of like why things happen the way they happen. And, it's a systematic fluke, I guess we can call it. But, looking at it's not a system that's really set up for us people to really be able to influence and care and participate. And so one thing I'll be really interested in is in this wake of this new quote unquote woke society of giving a shit about what people are doing. How are people going to change this, and how is it actually going to impact all of these things?
Mhm.
Because, you know, you care and you are like, well, what do you mean? There's 10,000 bills I have to call about, and you're not going to like listen to my voice because I matter and you are elected to represent me. And these are something that I care about. And this is my state and these are my things. And that's one of the things that's really interesting to me. And then Karen and I were talking about a different representative earlier this morning. And it's just very hopeful that people are actually paying attention to things and that politics is going like a little bit more quote unquote mainstream, because when people do things that you really don't agree with, you can speak with your vote and in the ballot box and all of those things, and, you know, hashtag power to the polls. And but that's just something that I've really noticed over the last year of like looking into these different places and starting to like actually be an activist. Is it's not a system that's set up to have activism necessarily be able to work. So that's why we have all of these other different types of organizations and podcasts like these and things like that that really have to be a rallying cry, because it is really hard to squeeze yourself in there as a person. So if you are a group like Indivisible or other people that can rally people and really get a move on in 5 calls, stuff like that. So that's been an interesting thing to notice and appreciate the necessity of those and all of the lovely people that dedicate their lives to that. And I've been really thinking about that over the last week, especially after the Women's March. So ladies are awesome.
Well, that's a nice segue into what do we do? How should we participate?
I actually, I'm going to bring up something that I was talking about before we started, but in the what do we do and how can we get involved? One of my favorite recent examples is my district's Democratic candidate for the state House of Representatives is a woman who was infuriated that there wasn't even a Democratic candidate at all, and decided, oh, I guess I could do it. And there's been a lot of discussion about how our standards for who can run have changed, especially in the wake of Trump getting elected and being able to say the most insane things and people still back him and support him. But one of the little plus sides, the silver lining of that, is that people who previously would never have considered it are going, oh my God, I could do this, which I think that's kind of awesome. Like we're going to have to sift through more people, obviously, but I think especially as women, we have the tendency to go, well, how am I even qualified to do this? Whereas a lot of men are just like, oh, of course I can do it. I'm whatever. Well, qualifications.
Yeah. People should listen to me.
Right. So Valerie Hefner, who is the candidate in my district, I met with her yesterday and we talked for a while about her misgivings about, she's in the race and she's doing this and she's like passionate about it. But she also is like, I didn't want this. This wasn't like a goal of mine. I didn't go to school for this. I don't have a degree in anything related to this. I have a GED. Like, she's doing this because she cares about what's happening, which I think is something that previously people really felt like you had to spend your life training to do this kind of work. And I think it's really exciting that we're entering into this new era where you can self-educate a lot more because of the accessibility of information, and you can take a stand and just put yourself into, if activism, like in the way that we're doing it, where you just call up representatives, isn't working for you and doesn't feel like enough, you can run and be one of the people that other people call, which is pretty cool. And that's where Valerie was. She was like, I felt like I was calling and nobody was hearing me. And so here I am. So I'm going to be running her campaign for her, and hopefully that will be successful. And even if it's not successful, I think it'll be valuable for the Democrats in my district to feel like there is a choice, at least, because Texas, I was looking at numbers from last year, and I think they said 60% of the state level races were unopposed Republicans, completely unopposed. So even if Democrats won every single solitary election, they couldn't have taken the House because there were so many districts that didn't even have a Democrat running at all. So yeah, I'm ready for this new era of like, let's do it ourselves. Okay, how about this? And thumbs up.
That will only improve because some of these people are going to win. Maybe yours will, but certainly some of these people are going to win. And so that will bring all new voices, all new experiences, all new knowledge. Like there's supposed to be turnover. This is how it improves. This is how we move forward. So I'm completely excited that all the people are ready.
Well, and just to give some numbers for people, if you go to Emily's List, it's a really great area to go into if you think that you want to do a little bit more than what we do here, what you currently do. And just a little cool thing is that 26,000 women have signed up to run for office since Election Day in 2016. And then 8,000 people have signed up to help them run through Emily's List. And so that's not even taking into account people like Natasha who fall into those things. But like, especially after this weekend in the Women's March, and I was there and every year, well, every of the 2 years that this has been, I've like had a very intense like crisis of thought and life afterwards because being a white lady, it's like really hard to see the other white ladies be there and be white ladies that are not white ladies that I want necessarily to be representing all of us white ladies. And, coming to terms with that and what that means and like how, and especially with intersectionality. And I feel like last year we had such a great momentum for women in general. And, that turned way more into a sexual assault conversation. And we came a long way in the last year. And so, exactly. And like, that was because of kind of the national ramp up and energy towards that. And I think that, that materialized itself in women coming forward with sexual assault and, that becoming a national conversation. And so, especially in the last few weeks, I've just been thinking about like, how do we get racism to be 2016's sexual assault and, talking about intersectionality with women and doing things like that. And it's hard when you like read the news and pay attention and are involved in things because you're like, I do a lot. Like I write all the time. I'm so informed. I am on Twitter. I know what's happening. I make these calls. But then there's so much to be done. It's like suffocating and like collapsing because there's no way that you could possibly be able to have a hand in everything that you care about. And so then like trying to get to understand something or focus in on something. And I think one of the best ways if you don't have something that is your key issue is to really help people run that you think will advocate for things that you believe in and support, because that's a way that you can have a hand in lots of different things, but you're only doing one thing. So you're not spreading yourself thin or, going on a mental breakdown because it's really easy to get yourself.
Hopefully.
Yeah, but it's so easy nowadays to get yourself to the cliff. And like, you have to like take yourself back from the cliff and like, make action steps. And I think especially in the last week and the Women's March and thinking of all those things, that's something that I've really identified for myself in 2018 is like, how can I feel like I am doing my darndest to take back the country? Because like, the news in the last 4 weeks have just been even crazier than all of 2017 combined. And it's like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I'm going to like explode. Like, I'm literally going to explode if I don't like figure out some way to like actually feel like I'm making a difference. And I think that that's something that's, especially for a white girl from Colorado in the mountains, like, I didn't know any of this shit existed like 10 years ago. Like I was living in the mountains, like with a whole bunch of other white people. And so like now I'm down here and I'm like, oh yeah. And like, there weren't kids who were out at my school, like nevertheless transgender. And like, none of that was happening. And so like, I was the classic white person of like, my parents raised me well and like they'd talk to us about race, but like there was like 30% of my high school was Hispanic, and then other than that, we had like 10 other people of color that like were not Hispanic, and like that's it. Like that's what diversity was to me. And I was like, well, I love all the Hispanic kids, so like this is like that's not how the world. That's not at all. Like that's qualifying statements like that, you know.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure all that out is just, it's coming. Everybody's thinking about it a little bit more, even if you are not somebody that subscribes to those opinions and beliefs. It's something that at least is on your radar now.
I'm sorry that you graduated and got out into the world and then got hit in the face with the 214. Like you didn't even get a few years to like, hey, let's have, it's some sort of Medicare for all or something. No, just boom, right into.
That's
hell.
the one thing that I really like try and keep in mind, and that it sort of makes me like stay hopeful, is remembering where I was even just before I got divorced. Like my husband at the time was more feminist than me. Like he was frustrated by things that I'd say or assumptions that I would make. But he didn't take the, like, I don't want to say he didn't take the time, like he wasn't putting in an effort, but I think that he was just like, I'm not doing this. Like, if you think that, then, oh my God, fine. And now I have, gone and discovered so much and look back and fucking put my face in my hands at some of the things that I would say or think or do. And it's just embarrassing. And I'm worried, like I used to record podcasts then. What have I said that's on tape that somebody could go find? And I'm just like, I don't even know. But we all have to start somewhere. And the only thing that I can hope is that even if things seem to be falling on deaf ears now, that it puts a kernel in there that starts people questioning things a little bit. Because I had my immediate reaction was getting defensive and being like, well, I'm not saying da, 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 da. And he would just kind of back off and be like, all right, fine. But that conversation would stay in my head and I'd think about it and just be like, well, I think this because this. And then I'd ask, but why do you think that? And I'm hoping that even when people seem like they're not hearing, that it at least lodges somewhere in their brain and they start to just go, maybe there is something there. Just, the little spark.
Movement has really worked that way. For a lot of guys who just haven't had these experiences, haven't done these things to women, and just didn't know that, literally every single one of us, and that dawning realization, especially the Twitter thread. And if I was a guy and it had never happened to me, I'd be like reading these stories going, oh my God. But yeah, like it can build up and you think about it and then maybe, I think,
or just guys like who they don't think they've done things like this to women. But then they start to realize like, oh, I put her in this position and she was scared. I didn't realize this was a threat to her, like it's the same thing with race, realizing that something that you said that at the time you thought was a compliment, you're like, oh, that was fucked up. I should not have
that to be a microaggression.
Yeah.
Well, and like I think that's such an important thing that you brought up, Natasha, of like actually being willing to like have the conversation about it. And even if you're just like going to challenge somebody with one sentence, like I just think that's so important. And like what a person in my family equated being transgender to wanting to be tall and have brown hair. And we are short people with blonde hair in my family. And I was like, and so like it took me like, a few seconds to like take back in everything that I was about to like put out and like learning how to have those conversations. And like I had a fight with her for quite a while, but it was more of like, what's wrong with you? That's not true at all. And like, why do you think that? And then like, let me try to explain in a way that is personal to me, has nothing to do with you, and like have the conversation. Does she believe that still? Of course. But like she is a substitute teacher and I was like terrified to think that she was like acting that way and she could have situations and interactions with people that would be like traumatic. And so I think she still thinks that, but I think after like taking the time and sitting down and trying to be like calm and collected and like, let me tell you stories about people that I know And like, this has nothing to do with the fact that you are crazy. And that is not even like, that is like comparing apples to staples. Like, but I think
Sarah, that is that's a perfect segue for what should we say to our Congress people? How do we talk to people? So you said a bunch of really good things in there. And Natasha, you're right. Like, you get defensive when people attack you. And as Sarah is saying, we need to try to say things that are not, don't evoke defensive reactions.
They're
right?
not charged.
Exactly. And if it's personal and all about you, I think that is key. So if you can't run for office and you can't be someone's campaign manager, at least you can call your representatives, hopefully on a regular basis. We do it weekly. It'd be great if you did it weekly, because it just feels better to be engaged and to be thinking about something and to actually call every week. And it's made a big difference to my mental health, I have to say. Mm-hmm. So when you call, if you're calling your state representative, they probably know what you're talking about because their issues are going to be pretty well aligned with your issues. But I think, and you guys can speak to this, the calls I feel like I've been listened to the best, where I didn't get a perfunctory, okay, I'll tell them, but rather got some kind of engagement or some kind of reaction, where I was saying not just what I thought, but a little bit of why. So Natasha, you spoke about how you had relatives in Puerto Rico. I felt like that was super impactful, right? When I can, I'll say, well, I'm an entrepreneur and I started this company and I employ people, and here's how that's going to affect me. That can be very effective. So it can be like any personal thing, your experience, your education, your background, like any of those things can really help make it personal, and then let you talk about that issue in a way that the person taking the call, it will actually register, and they'll be able to pass along something more than just a tally. Mm-hmm. That being said, at least passing along a tally is something, mm-hmm. and that lets the representative know when they're going vastly against the people's will. And I think that actually did help with the healthcare a little bit. So if you just send a form letter, if you just click on Twitter, if you just like, that doesn't get tallied anywhere, because what are they going to do with all of that, right? Mm-hmm. If you just sign on to an internet petition, okay, like do that, but call because it will at least get tallied. And if you can tell a compelling story briefly to the point, you can break through, and they will say, this is actually a point I want to bring up with the representative or with the senator. So I don't know, like, when have you felt like your calls were effective?
Well, like what you were saying with the Puerto Rico call, and I feel like obviously those who listened for a while know that calling on the federal level, I almost always got a voicemail. So calling on the local level just tended to be more satisfying and felt like I was getting a human being. And as far like you had brought up doing like Twitter and things like that, and I was reading an article recently that said that although people will fill out forms on different websites to like send to it when it's an automatically generated with a kind of form statement, a lot of times those will not be counted the same way because they don't believe that every constituent is even aware that these are being sent on their behalf. So you think you're doing something, but that's not actually being taken seriously by them because they're not the nature of the way that information is sent to them makes it feel like spam, basically. Mm-hmm. So including your own personal thoughts and things, and trying, even when you use a 5-call script, inserting something personal will get their attention, because if they've been answering calls all day and everybody's reading the same script, it's not going to click with them. You just start to zone out. You hear the same opening sentence and you're like, all right, okay, yeah, here they go. But then they go into something surprising and you get their attention a little bit more. So I think that 5 calls is really valuable with giving people a blueprint to work with, but I don't think that it's a good idea to just recite, somebody else's words.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the personalization of activism is, that's the only thing that really has people listen, is hearing personal stories. And one of someone was talking about like issues of rights and things like that, and like how, like, for example, with LGBT issues, like you never go back to thinking something if you've changed your mind. Like after you hear the stories and understand that things like really matter and there's people's lives and like it's real things, you never go back to being like, yeah, well, gayness is horrible and like whatever. Like if you go the other way, you're never going to go back because that thing has clicked for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing too. And then also like one of my favorite things that happened last year was like the hashtag your tweets aren't enough. And so I think, again, like that's something that's really important is like you actually have to try to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And like that sucks and it takes time out of your life. But like if you love this country, it's worth fighting for. And like you just have to.
Literally the least you can do.
Literally. Yeah.
Well, you should vote, right? So do that.
That as well.
Every year, every couple of years. But then if you could call on a regular basis, that would be great. All right. So hopefully we've all convinced each other to call. So you can find your representatives. You can Google your state legislature. Bill Track 50 has a free app. So you can just Google or look in the App Store for Bill Track 50, and that will give you an app that will tell you your congressman, and you can just click and call them, state and federal. So there's lots of ways to look up the information you need. 5 calls, lots of websites will help you find that information and make a call. And then we'll show you how calls can go. We'll give you examples of scripts. We'll show you what they say and what you can say back. Often you're just talking to voicemail, so it's really not intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a minute, but that will get tallied. And so we were going to do it for a whole nother year, another 50 calls. We're going to do it.
I'm excited.
All right. Everybody, I hope you join us all year long.
Same. Thank you, ladies, for being here and for re-educating me because Sarah's showing a sticker that says "Purist" with a
Persist.
Oh, persist. Oh, it's purist. Like I'm a purist.
No, this year we persist.
That's funny.
Very cute.
But yeah, this, as Karen said, helps with mental health. Knowing that you're doing something. The quote that I put at the bottom of the newsletter today was, I'm finding it, hold on. I want to make sure that I get it right. Was, nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could do only a little. And that's something that would just be great for me to apply in my life in general, because I am an extremist, and unless I can do it all, I just am like, well, I guess I can't do anything, and that's just no way to be. So yeah, I think this is that. A good step in that direction. Everybody do a little.
And then it will be a lot.
It will.
Like
It'll be
all the snowflakes, they turn into an avalanche, motherfucker.
And there we go.
All right, everybody. We will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.